Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com, and there's all different types of lenses and terminologies that you will hear about as you get into photography, and I want to break them down in this video, starting with the basics of a kit lens. You'll hear the terminology kit lens quite often when you're buying your first camera or making upgrades. A kit lens tends to be something like this that's smaller, it's inexpensive, it's a variable aperture, which I'll talk about in just a second, but it's usually what they include with your first type of bodies or cameras that you're buying. It's a basic setup. They'll get the job done. You can get great results no matter what you have, but it's an okay starting point. So, what is a variable aperture lens? Variable aperture means that as you zoom, the aperture is going to change. Your f-stop is going to change. So whereas let's say it starts at f3.5, as you zoom out, you're going, or some people might say as you zoom in, whichever terminology you want to use there, as you zoom the lens, you're going to lose light, meaning your aperture is going to go from 3.5 to 4 to 5 to 5.6, sometimes out to 6.3. Now, variable aperture lenses tend to be less expensive. They give you a large zoom range, but they don't gather as much light, and that's why they're still considered variable aperture zoom lenses. Now, what is a fixed aperture lens? Now, fixed aperture means that the aperture will stay the same throughout the entire zoom range. For example, I have a 24 to 70 2.8 right here, which means at 24 it's 2.8 and at 70 it's 2.8. Now these lenses are considered to be more of the professional end because they're more expensive. They have a lot more glass in them, they're heavier, and they're more considered for the professional like I just said. This is also a fixed aperture lens. It's a 70 to 200 2.8. You're looking at something like $2,000 for a lens like this, whereas a kit lens that would be, say, a 55 to 200 may only be $299. There's pros and cons to all of that. So we've talked about zooms, we've talked about variable apertures, but then you'll also hear about prime lenses. Some of the oldest lenses ever made, they were primes. They don't zoom, which means they have the same focal length, like a 35 millimeter, a 50 millimeter. Basically, they don't zoom. Like this right here is a 50 millimeter 1.2. If you need to get closer to your subject or you want to zoom in, you have to move your feet. You have to figure out how to get closer or further away because it's a prime lens. Now, prime lenses tend to be sharper because there's not a lot of movement. There really aren't moving elements other than your focus mechanism, which you control, but everything else is just, it's beautiful. You get some fantastic results with these, and they tend to be more expensive. But I will tell you that most manufacturers out there have inexpensive prime lenses for people starting out in a price about $199. It's a very nice starting point. Then you start to get into more specialty lenses. You heard the term fisheye before. You see a lot of those skateboarding photos where people use a fisheye which bows the edges and gets this extreme curvature going on. Those tend to be prime lenses, but you can also find zoom fisheye lenses as well. Now, the opposite of fisheye is what's called rectal linear. That's where instead of getting that big fisheye effect, you get a more straight lines at the edges. That's something like this, which is an 11 to 24. Now, when you look at the front elements, you can see how bowed and huge they both are in terms of the fisheye. They look very similar, but they do different things. They have different effects. One gives you that fisheye look, and one gives you more of a straight line stretched out at the edges. Then you have macro lenses. Macro lenses tend not to be zooms. They tend to be prime lenses, but they allow you to get closer to whatever you're trying to photograph and get a really nice, sharp, tight image up close. You could try and do the same thing with a zoom lens, but macro lenses generally let you focus closer to get a better image. They can vary in prices from a couple $100 to a couple $1,000 depending on what you're getting. And then finally, we move into something called a super telephoto zoom lens. You can have something like a Sigma 150 to 600, which is a super telephoto lens. It also is a variable aperture, and that gives you a huge zoom range. But then you have super telephoto fixed lenses like this, 300 2.8. Some people may look at it and be like, that must be the biggest zoom in the world. Well, it's actually not. It's a prime lens. This is $6,000 because it's an f2.8. It lets a lot of light in. So it may be deceiving to some people looking at it to think that it can see the moon up close, when in fact, this one right next to it is also a 300, but it's an f4, so it's less expensive, but this is 300 millimeters and this is 300 millimeters. So as you can see, there's a lot of different terms to get familiar with, but I wanted to give you a basic understanding of all the different terms that you would hear to give you a crash course on understanding what they are and what you can hope to have in the future, everything from kit lenses to prime lenses to variable aperture to fisheye to rectilinear, all of it. So I really hope this video helped you out. And if you would like to take your photography to another level, quickly and efficiently start to get amazing images that I know you can capture, I created the Fronos Photo Guide to Getting Out of Auto, which is a 3-hour guide that's going to allow you to unlock the potential of your photography as well as your camera. So to check out a free preview, go to fronosphoto.com/guide, where you can watch that right now and determine if that guide is for you. Hopefully it is. If it is, go ahead and pick it up. And I also want to thank you for watching this video, and that's where I'll leave it. Jared Polin, fronosphoto.com. See ya.